Welcome to the IoT Unicorn podcast. This is Pete Bernard from Microsoft. We have a very special guest today. We're going to be talking about long-term technology trends in the IoT space. So let's get started. This is actually our first episode, which I recorded with Andrew Hardy, who's the Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing NXP. About a month ago or so. We've been recording a few episodes here before we got started. I want to take just a minute to talk a little bit about this podcast and what we're trying to do here, what is going on. And turns out that there's a lot of great conversations out there about IoT, a lot of things going on there with the technology and impact to businesses. And I've been having a lot of great conversations with partners, internal folks at Microsoft about the future of IoT, where it's heading long term. What are some of the things that we'll see changed around the business, around the technology, around impact to people? So I thought it would be helpful, entertaining, and fun to take some of those conversations and record them and turn them into a podcast. And that's basically what we have here. So the IoT Unicorn name actually came from an idea around this kind of like, imagine this deployment of IoT devices that are securely connected, zero latency, super high bandwidth, super low cost, intelligent on the edge, just kind of like this ultimate thing. And I kind of think of that as the North Star for IoT. Like, how do we get to that level of technology? And I don't know if we'll ever get there, but we're trying to get there. And so I use the term IoT Unicorn to really kind of represent that North Star that we're trying to get to. And my conversations with the folks that you'll be hearing moving forward will be around that journey. In addition, I know that this is about the technology, but it's also about the people. And sometimes the people journey is as important, if not more important, than the technology journey. So I will spend some time talking to guests about their journey, their career journey, how do they get to the roles that they're at, and what impact that's had with them. So first one up is Andrew Hardy. Andrew is someone I've worked with for a long time and really appreciate his insight. We'll talk a little bit about ultra-wideband and where that's heading. We'll talk about scale of IoT. We'll talk a little bit about how he got to San Jose and some of the interesting coincidences that has with me. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the pod.
Thanks, Pete. We look forward to a good, robust discussion today.
Yes, it's good. Yes. And so full disclosure, Andrew and I have been working together for about a year or so. So we kind of know each other. So hopefully this will be a good casual discussion. The one of the things kind of, Andrew, I wanted to start out with, and as I said, we've been working together for a little bit. And you're down in San Jose in California. I'm up here in Redmond. One of the things that was kind of interesting is like, maybe you can just kind of tell us a little bit about how did you end up in San Jose? How did you end up at NXP doing what you're doing?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. It sort of spells out the relevance of the conversation we're about to have. I've been in the semiconductor industry for north of 20 years now. Spent majority of my time in San Jose, and have been involved in many different trends in the industry, starting off with the .com era and the networking spike that laid the infrastructure for a lot of the technologies that we leverage in our world today, and then moved into a lot of focus on the mobile side of our business, and had been in that for a good 4 or 5 years. And then ultimately joined NXP about 5.5 years ago, leading the Americas, based in San Jose, where we've been for the last, north of actually the last 5 years, have been focused on developing the Internet of Things and edge computing. And the reason I brought up those prior trends was because in a lot of ways they took shape very much like the IoT market is right now, in that they started off with a lot of hype and a lot of buzz, and then ultimately as companies got into the details behind the concepts and the visions of that particular technology, really a lot of the hard work started after that, and eventually the vision came to fruition, albeit at a slightly different timing than originally had anticipated. But I think to a large extent have had a very big impact on our on our worlds that we live in today. So looking forward to talking to you today about the IoT journey and where we are, at least NXP sees it today.
By the way, what did you do during the .com era? I'm just curious.
I was focused on the DSL market and the central office DSLAM market. So
I'm not sure I know what that is, but sounds interesting.
The
DSLAM market.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool. Yeah, actually, so interesting. Another interesting factoid. Speaking of journeys, I actually I had visited NXP several times over the past year in San Jose, and sort of I think on my third visit, I realized that I had actually worked in that building when I was in the Bay Area. I was working for Phoenix Technologies, which is an old BIOS company, firmware company, and I kept, every time I visited that building, I'm like, this place looks really familiar. And then finally I'm like, oh yeah, I worked here for like 5 years or something. So I could never figure out where my office was, but it's an interesting building. And in fact, when I was down at Phoenix down there, speaking of IoT journeys, we started an embedded software group at Phoenix, just specifically to do firmware for embedded systems and industrial PCs and things. So it's been a long journey. I think folks that have been in the embedded, we used to call it embedded, now we call it IoT, but in the embedded world, you know, a lot of things still are the same. You know, I mean, you've got firmware, you got to do bring up, you've got to figure out how to get your data in and out, and have all your low power stuff. But obviously now we're in a sort of a totally different era. So I think what's interesting, what I've known about NXP and kind of studied you guys over the past year or so, you have a really broad portfolio of silicon and solutions. So I mean, you guys are in everything. I think it's like from MCUs to IMX chips to layerscape, cars, bathroom scales, you name it. So I mean, where do you see sort of over the next 3 to 5 years, like what's the big inflection point for businesses that are driving these kind of IoT solutions and adopting this kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, it's the $1 million question, right? And
billion.
Yeah, exactly, more billion. If we look at going back to the sort of hype cycle, I think we have moved past the hype, so to speak. A lot of the companies that we talk to in the various different markets, and that includes retail, appliances for the home security, industrial, automotive, they all absolutely see the value proposition. And there are now proof points and examples where certain companies have come out and started to take advantage of the data that they're capturing on the edge and making the user experience significantly better than what it was before the technology was there.
Right.
And even if you look at CES this year, a lot of the conversation moved from the vision into more of an implementation state. And so to me, it's now a testimony to the fact that people are deep into the details now. A lot of customers are going through all the various components of what are required to build a fleet of IoT devices. But what we've sort of uncovered in this is that the complexity that is there with building an IoT device in terms of the development of the family of products is substantially greater than what a lot of these customers had anticipated. Couple that with the fact now that you've got additional challenges of security that you have to manage to preserve your brand, especially as you enter into a home or an industrial manufacturing plant or in retail, and you're dealing with people's data. That has become at the center of the discussion. And then in addition to that, people want to take advantage of machine learning and the vision and the potential that technology has.
Right.
And so you've added on 2 additional layers on top of what is the traditional, as you mentioned earlier, software, embedded software, power management, the price to performance ratios, and so forth. You've got these additional layers of complexity that you have to manage. And so what we're finding is customers' development schedules are expanding because of this complexity. And so you start off with a business case that you're aiming for a market window, and as you get into that development, you find you can't either scale at the pace you needed, or your execution isn't landing at the mark that you had, and so that's creating a problem. Now, as you and I have talked about for now a year or beyond, that problem, I think, in a lot of ways presents an opportunity for NXP and Microsoft to really go off and try to help solve this issue, to make that experience much more simple, so that our mutual customers can invest the resources that they have on the things that will differentiate them versus having to create a new infrastructure.
Yeah, the bar is definitely higher. I mean, back when I was at Phoenix, the goal was to boot. Can you power the system up and boot? And then you're pretty much like 90% done at that point. But that's like the starting point these days. And I was just on a conference call before I came in here to do this recording, and we were talking to a partner, and they had this spec of all the stuff they wanted to do, and AI, vision, all this other stuff. And I was kind of like, are you sure you want to do all this, like in the next 6 months? Because this is like a dozen PhDs worth of work, to do it. And it's like, I think it's pretty interesting. Like you said, like we find customers, and we have a lot of common customers that are imagining these really awesome business outcomes. Right. And, but then they read all the articles, listen to all the podcasts like this one, and they get all excited about stuff. But then they realize that the amount of work still to sort of get there from, the platform is booting to actually solving business outcomes is pretty complicated. Mm-hmm. And, frankly, all that time that's spent in that complexity is just eating away at their investment on the ROI, right? So that's the opportunity.
And then eventually, once the product is built, the real pressure testing comes is when it gets in front of their customer. Mm-hmm. Their customer expects that they will be there and stand behind their product for the next 10 plus years in some markets.
Yeah.
And so who's going to be the guy that has the track record to stand behind and life cycle manage these devices that sit in your home or your manufacturing plant with the updated security and the supply for that extended period of time? And so it's the complexity doesn't stop once the design's done. The complexity is, how do you build something that's going to sustain the test of time for these extended periods of time? And then how do you build the next generation of that product such that you're not having to reinvent the software the next generation, right?
Yeah, no, that's the ideal. I mean, I think, and also it depends on the market, right? I think you guys sell into a lot of markets, the consumer market, the commercial market. I know for myself, like I get these AI cameras, these connected cameras for my house and stuff. And I had one of them that stopped working recently. It's kind of almost disposable. It's like, it's $30, $40.
Yeah.
It just kind of died. So I'm like, chuck it in the garbage. But obviously if you're like Chevron, and you're outfitting all your oil rigs with all this, tech, that stuff needs to be serviceable, and it's got the decades worth of stuff going on. You mentioned security, actually, and I know that NXP has this huge position in the market in security. A lot of people maybe don't know that. Can you elaborate a little bit on all the stuff you're doing around security and secure elements and like transit cards and stuff? I mean, the footprint of NXP is massive.
Yeah,
right?
No, so we've NXP for over 15 years now has been investing heavily in security. We've spent the majority of our time focused on the financial transactions business, for whether or not it's your credit card, for the chip on the credit card to authenticate, that eventually moved into the mobile phone. And then we took that business and developed the mobile transit business as well. So if you go through a metro across the world, more than likely you're gonna be utilizing NXP's technology for getting access to the metro. And so after we established that market and given our focus on IoT, we've taken this wealth of knowledge and security and started to apply it to the IoT market. Now, the challenge is you're dealing with a connected device on the edge. Obviously, that device is talking to the cloud, and so when we went to look at how we solve the security problem, it became very apparent to us that we had to have a very tight relationship with a cloud provider that put as much weight on security as we did, and so no no pun intended, but this is exactly why we went to Microsoft, right? Because we felt that there was a clear heritage and importance in the design cycle that we saw that Microsoft put on their own products related to security. And I think that just general philosophy of the importance of security married well with NXP. And so as we try to solve these security problems, which are different in IoT than what we've dealt with in the past, we feel like we have a good partner with Microsoft that has really, put that at the core of the initiative that we're trying to solve with IoT.
Yeah, and I know that we announced that Azure Sphere partnership with you this past year, which is pretty exciting, and marries well with kind of your heritage of security. And we have we're coming at it, traditionally, obviously, Microsoft coming at it more from the PC angle and the cloud angle, but getting that aligned with you is going to be pretty awesome. I think that we're kind of scratching the surface on security. One of the things we also find is that, you sort of see this as an example in there was that recent thing with the Ring camera, where people were spying on stuff. They didn't turn on the two-factor auth. That wasn't the default security. You had to sort of opt into that. And I think one of the things that we're finding is, even though there's a lot of security capabilities built into platforms and systems, a lot of times people don't utilize them. They don't turn them on. And so we need to figure out a way, I think, to get people to sort of have much more of a default stance around secure endpoints than maybe they traditionally have had. But there's probably a whole other podcast we can do on security, at least.
But, last point on that, you're absolutely right. But user experience has to be seamless as well. And I think that you bring up a really good point in that if you put a lot of the responsibility on the user, they may not always actually take advantage of it.
Sure.
And so building a solution that and a service, frankly, and that's why we think Azure Sphere is a great bar to set for security. Is there's a lot of seamlessness service that goes behind that customers no longer have to really worry about implementing a high level of security for their devices and the edge. And so we feel like that's a really good bar that's been set, and obviously intend on trying to raise it over time.
Yeah, I think that maybe that's one of the things that distinguishes kind of the newer era of IoT from kind of what we've traditionally been doing is now we need to think about systems, end-to-end systems, as opposed to pieces of technology.
Yeah.
Sometimes they call them solutions, but really end-to-end systems where it's the silicon, it's the firmware, it's the cloud, it's the service, it's even the policies, for some of these things that need to be in place for the whole thing to really work well. And so it's I think someone once said, IoT is a team sport, and certainly we need lots of folks on the team to make it work. Is there anything else like we should be thinking about, like when you look out, let's say 3 to 5 years from now? We talked about kind of the old school embedded systems. We're talking about IoT stuff here and where things are heading. But what's kind of the next frontier from NXP's perspective?
Yeah, I think you're going to start to see a lot of the machine learning capabilities that oftentimes we probably experience in the cloud today. You're going to see that starting to move down to the edge into smaller devices. And more these devices are going to be able to learn behaviors and start to become more intelligent with time. And so by moving that machine learning capability, which is trained in the cloud, down to the edge in a cost-effective way, is going to improve both the real-time nature of decision making. Mm-hmm. It's also going to reduce the cost of a lot of data going back and forth to the cloud. So it'll be done in a more economic fashion. And so ultimately, the decision making of those devices is going to improve. Ultimately, also, I think, from a connectivity perspective, more and more devices on the edge is creating bottlenecks on the edge. And so you're going to see new emerging wireless connectivity devices that will improve efficiency in the Wi-Fi networks. Obviously, 5G presents a significant opportunity for more intelligence in remote areas. And then new technologies like ultra wideband that will ultimately provide more precision accuracy of actually identifying the location of devices and people, literally down to 10 centimeter spatial accuracy. So it's that's extremely exciting. When you think about identifying in a way that maintains privacy, but
Right.
also allows you to to sort of walk seamlessly through your home or through your workplace and gain access to devices without having to to connect to a certain network or log in and so forth. That can be done through a typical an authentication of your device within a certain proximity and knowing it's you. So there's
I was going to ask you, like, so ultra wideband, I mean, is that something that can be used to track location of things or
yes,
people?
yeah. And the first area that this is going to start off is really in the automotive sector for key access, and that particular technology is going to offer a more secure way of authenticating that you have the keys and where you are located. So over a pretty long range. So you can authenticate and pass keys along across mobile devices and so forth.
So this will help me find my keys, or is this it?
Yeah, well, actually, it'll just maybe potentially allow you to eliminate your keys, so you can use your phone for that.
Okay.
And then ultimately, though, then you can start to see that playing into access into the home, and or into an enterprise location, or detecting in an emergency where people are in an enterprise and in a very close proximity, right? So there's a lot of potential, even in retail, as well, as people walk through the aisles of the supermarket and where they're spending time and not spending time.
Managing traffic. I think one of the things we'll see is that there's a lot of interest in cameras right now, and people use the term cameras, and everyone kind of freaks out because no one wants their picture taken. And in fact, when I use Teams, hashtag Teams, I use my camera all the time. Very few people actually turn their camera on. I think people just have a natural, I don't know.
Bad hair day,
I guess. But I think one of the cool trends, and this is where UWB might help, is I think there's going to be a lot more sensors around understanding whether there's people there or not, or there's, things are happening without actually having to identify faces and actually having to generate PII, because the last thing you want is a bunch of faces up to the cloud and then bad things happen. So I think it's kind of interesting to think about alternative kind of sensor tech that'll be coming out, and UWB be part of that. Is like, I want to know the traffic flow around my store, but there's no reason why I need cameras to look at people's faces. And so making some of that stuff, much more anonymous is I think a really good thing, because I think people are rightly concerned about just too much, private information getting up into the system, as they say. So that's cool that might help that area.
I think the next area that we have got a lot of investment going into right now is in the automotive sector. Basically, there is you can start to see that the automotive industry is starting to revolutionize with the electrification of automobiles, and there's the vision of autonomous vehicles as well. But the entire architecture of an automobile is really sort of being revolutionized right now. And it's almost, it really is, frankly, the ultimate edge computing platform, because it's on wheels.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
And connected to the cloud, and there's a lot of latency components that are challenges that you have to deal with there. And so we see customers, and we are as well, really looking at that problem very differently than the traditional automotive architectures. And it's almost a lot like a kind of a small data center on wheels. And the networking and the storage and the decision making through processing and how that's distributed throughout the vehicle is an area that's getting significant investment right now. And it's emerging new players as well too, right? And I know Microsoft is in that conversation from the cloud side.
Yep.
We are absolutely in the discussion from secure edge gateways in the automobile as well as the infotainment side. So for us, it's I think just naturally over the next 5-7 years, the work is being done now to come up with very new, innovative vehicles that we will start to see driving around us in our world, which is very exciting.
Yeah, actually, so we hadn't bought a new car in about 10 years, and my wife recently picked up a Jeep Gladiator. It was pretty cool. It's like that Jeep with the pickup thing, and the tech in this thing. I mean, the dashboard and the electronics was like amazing. Like, I mean, it felt like it was like 100 years in the future relative to this old Ford Flex. Nothing against Ford and Flex. I'm sure the new ones are great, but the 2009 one was not so great. But the Gladiator was like super impressive. And so, yeah, I think there's a long way to go there. And the other thing that's interesting about the automobile, and you can almost apply this to other things too, is that there's so much data being generated by these things to run, algorithms on the telemetry. The amount of data on these things is incredible. And it's, I think we're just scratching the surface about what we can understand about equipment based on data. I saw it like at CES, someone had hooked up some telemetry around the current draw on a coffee machine. And they were able to, based on the different current draw, kind of determine which type of coffee you were making, like which pod was being inserted, because different pods require different sort of amounts of power draw. So even taking something like that, or like your dryer or washing machine, like the dryer, if the current draw is very high in the dryer, maybe it's overloaded and things like that. So I think we'll see people taking all these signals and doing some
There's a lot of examples of that. I mean, ultimately, what's one of the biggest decision criteria for an automobile is a maintenance record, right? And the ability to quickly diagnose and improve that experience, because ultimately there is going to be maintenance, but to the ability to go in to get your car serviced, know precisely where the issue is, when it occurred, and maybe even potentially have the components ordered for you prior to arrival, that just changes the complete user experience altogether, right?
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Proposition that
I needed that on my 2009 Flex, because that was in the shop a lot.
Maybe hours in the day, right?
So. Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Well, Andrew, thanks for indulging us with your time.
No, thank you for having me.
Down there in that beautiful building in San Jose. I'm sure we'll see each other pretty soon.
Very good. Thanks again for the conversation and the partnership as well, Pete.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew.
All right. Take care.
This is Pete Bernard. You've been listening to the IoT Unicorn. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for the next pod.